Über Online-Events haben wir uns zuletzt schon unterhalten und wir haben eine ganze Menge Reaktionen bekommen. Menschen hatten verschiedenste Fragen und gesagt, Mensch, wenn wir jetzt Fortbildung online haben, wenn wir Events online haben, wir haben es jetzt versucht, haben unsere Erfahrung gemacht, einige positive, einige negative. Allerdings ganz klar ist das Echo, dass alle sagen, in Zukunft möchten wir online mehr machen. Die Frage ist, wie wird es richtig gemacht? Wir hatten schon darüber gesprochen mit Alan Stevens, bekannt von BBC, Sky und so weiter. Unter anderem auch eben der Inhaber der Gruppe Remote Speaking, die Sie auf Facebook kostenlos finden. Eine sehr wertvolle Gruppe mit vielen Inhalten und vor allen Dingen mit keinerlei kommerzieller Aktivität. Also es darf dort niemand irgendetwas verkaufen. Das macht die Gruppe so wertvoll. Es tauschen einfach Menschen mit Expertise sich auf einem sehr guten Niveau aus und helfen sich gegenseitig. Wir haben Alan Stevens zurückgeholt, denn wir hatten weitere Fragen in diesem Bereich. Und zwar dieses Mal geht es nicht darum, ob Online-Events funktionieren, sondern welche spezifischen Fragestellungen es von Ihrer Seite gab, denen wir uns jetzt in diesem Podcast gewidmet haben. Das Interview wurde in englischer Sprache geführt. Back by popular demand. That's the only thing I can say. After our first interview about if remote event really work, we got a lot of reactions and a lot of questions. So we brought the expert back. Hello and welcome back, Alan Stevens.
Niels, a pleasure to be with you again.
Thank you very much for taking the time again. We received quite a number of reactions about online events, and it looks like that a handful of organizations did quite well, but many of them struggle in one way or the other to really get it off the ground. And I think we should just start with talking about their question. Is that okay for you?
Okay, far away.
Yeah. So question number one is, people say it is quite hard to find a good opening. Normally they had some sort of video or an inspirational speech, and they say it simply doesn't work that way when they're online, and suddenly everything feels very formal and people don't get into the mood, into the groove of a proper meeting. So how to open an online event to get event feeling?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, actually, and I would agree with people. It is much more difficult to create that kind of buzz when you're online. So again, I come back to my metaphor that I've used before. We've talked about this before, and the metaphor is of a TV show. A TV show, when it starts, it always trails what's coming up.
Yeah.
So you're always talking about, what's going to happen, who's going to be the star of the show, what's going to happen later on. We're going to have this, we're going to have that, we're going to have the other, we're going to start with this. In other words, all TV and radio shows tend to begin with a trailer, a teaser, if you will. And I think an online event can work in exactly the same way. So if you start to set up the various things that are going to happen to give people something to look forward to, it's much more effective than the sort of thing you would do in a face-to-face event, as you say, a motivational speech or something like that.
So when we find a proper opening and we go from one speaker to the other, people often said it feels like there is not a proper transition, not a proper segue. It feels a bit like, we have that speaker and our next speaker is XYZ and our next speaker is XYZ. So it again feels very stiff, very planned. Planned is not particularly bad, but it doesn't feel like there's a proper transition between different speakers. What is your suggestion? How could this be handled well?
Well, again, I use the analogy or the metaphor of the media, and that is that of a link presenter. It's not quite the same as an MC. An MC is somebody who tends to come on stage, tends to kind of gee up the crowd a little bit, and sometimes summarize at the end of a speaker. A link presenter is different. A link presenter will quite often have somebody else alongside them. You may have two people who will discuss what's happened. They might be, again, doing some throw forwards to talk about what's coming up later in the day. And maybe talk about something which is an aside, something else which has occurred, which is not necessarily relevant to the speakers. In other words, it's not just, thank you very much, here's somebody else coming on, here's their biography, here's the number of books they've written, which is frankly pretty dull. We don't want that sort of thing. Exactly. We want people to engage our interest, and that's why link presenting is probably a better way to look at it.
So when we now have this kind of transition done, people had a lot of questions about tech. And they say there is a lot of stuff to get the interaction started, but they feel a bit overwhelmed. And also they said that, especially when now online events are the next new thing which you should do as an organization, people say it's a bit like the shiny new object syndrome, where they say not only do we have to implement hundreds of tools, also the risk of technical failure just goes through the roof.
That's right.
How do I find the right amount of let's say, interaction, new tech stuff, but without overloading the meeting, only with pointless apps and similar?
Well, again, very, very good question. I mean, one thing is to rely on somebody's experience. Talk to someone who's done it before. And they're not necessarily a traditional event organizer, nor a traditional technician. I mean, there's a new breed of people coming through who understand how online events work. There are a number of systems that are out there at the moment that will be fairly easy to use. But again, you've got to know how to use them. So one thing I would say is talk to an expert. Find someone who's done this before. Also, you'd expect me to say this, join my remote speaking group on Facebook.
Yeah, of course.
A huge amount, as you know yourself, Niels, a huge amount of expertise and free advice in there about how you can run events more effectively. A lot of it's to do with practice, but my guideline would be to keep it simple. Don't try and introduce more than one new thing at each event. If you want to try out an app, a voting app perhaps, or something to give people different camera angles, try that one thing out. Don't bring in a lot of innovation at the same time. Keep it as simple as possible. The real thing that you need to think about is the capacity. It's not so much about the clever transitions and what goes on. Do you have the capacity, the bandwidth, and the necessary licensing to have the number of people online that you should? And provided you've got decent audio and video, you don't need to worry about all those fancy tricks. Just get the capacity there, keep it simple.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. And yes, I know the Facebook group is very good. And what I really appreciate about the group is that there's no commercial activity allowed.
That's right.
So it's really about the content and not about someone selling something.
That's absolutely right.
Another question which came up was about the online host. So we said last time we should have an online host, and people said there are two problems. Normally, when they say we should have a proper MC, a proper host of the event, often they then meet the financial department or even their leadership team, and they say either we don't have a budget for that, or they say just take someone from internal. Someone is going to do that.
It's something we often hear, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Karen from accounts can do that. She's quite good at speaking. And it never really works, does it? It never really works. And I think obviously there's a conversation about the investment. And I always, whenever I'm having these conversations, because I do that sort of thing myself, as you know, I talk to people about what if you didn't have anybody? And what if something went wrong? You see, the value of having a professional host, a professional link person, is not about an event that runs perfectly smoothly, because anybody can do that. It's about when something doesn't go smoothly, when the timing's off, when the technology isn't working properly, when a guest hasn't turned up. Those are the times when you find that a professional host will manage perfectly, almost as though nothing went wrong, whereas somebody who is not professional, somebody who is just saying, put their hand up and said, well, I've done another Christmas party, I'll be fine, they're going to flounder, they're going to struggle. So I think the conversation needs to be had. What if it goes wrong? What if everything doesn't run perfectly? Do a quick risk analysis. You'll find there are a number of points of failure that a professional will get you through.
And we have an additional question with that. So let's say you have arbitrary name. Let's say you either have Carl from accounts or you have James from the sales team, who is very extroverted, who loves to be on stage. How do you politely tell these people we prefer to have someone else without putting them off the event?
I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because obviously you don't want to hurt people's ego. You don't want to put them down. I think what you would say to people is, look, this is not the event for the kind of presentation that you do. People are going to run a series of events across a year, and not every event is suitable for every person, and not every person suitable for every event. So I think what you need to say is, we are trying to find the best fit for the best possible outcome for the people who are attending this event. And if that means that somebody who's full of ebullience and jumps up and down and throws things around is not the right person, then they've just got to accept that.
Yeah, excellent. Well, one question I think is not even particularly linked to online events, but people like to have your experience and your knowledge about that. They say, how do we handle diversity, especially today with online events? Should we set a quota? And then, of course, I got a couple of emails which I couldn't believe, where they say, in the financial industry, we don't have that many female experts, which I think is utter nonsense.
It's very interesting, Niels. As you know, from time to time, I publish the demographics of the remote speaking group. Over 1,500, nearly 1,600 people in now. Yeah. 55% of those are women. Yeah. There's a lot of diversity in the group as well. The people are there. People are out there. You don't have to look very hard to find people who, of all sorts. Obviously, we want the best person for the event. We don't want tokenism. We don't want quotas necessarily. But what we want are people who can do a professional job. And believe me, those people are there. You don't have to look very hard, but you do have to look a little bit.
Okay, so in your opinion, it is because some people say when it's, and that is, I'm going to, if it's only an online event, isn't it okay when we have an all-male lineup? My answer is a clear no.
No.
What is your take on that?
No, of course it's not.
Okay.
Of course, it doesn't matter if it's not only online. It's any event, isn't it? I mean, there's the pledge that we sign. Many of us sign not to appear on all male panels and so on, or all male events, and there's no reason why you should. There are so many good speakers of all types, genders, sexualities, races, religions. It doesn't matter. There are so many good speakers around that if you're saying all I'm going to have is white men for an event, you're really not trying hard enough.
Yeah, excellent. I fully agree. Of course, a couple of people ask, are they allowed to, when they look for speakers, remote speakers, are they allowed to post that in the remote speaking group? I'm not sure. Are they allowed to do that?
I think it's the word is check with the admin team, which is me and 6 other people. Sometimes we say it's okay if you're genuinely looking for speakers to fill in the event and you don't know where to find them, then by all means we will allow you to post that and we will help you out. What we're against, as I know is anybody who's trying to use that for some kind of commercial activity. If they're trying to get people for free that they should be paying for, if they're trying to exploit people, then we're not going to allow that to be posted.
Yeah, and that's good because professionals get paid. That's
correct. That's why we're professional. Yes,
exactly. And now, of course, people ask, what is the maximum duration for an online event? And some people ask, can we do an 8 hours event? Won't people get tired? Then, of course, they talked about Zoom fatigue. Is it more 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours? What is your take on the maximum duration of an event? Because people, of course, know that on-site events sometimes start at 8 a.m. in the morning, end at 10 p.m. in the evening.
They do. That's right.
So how is that online?
Well, I think there's a great phrase in professional speaking that you should stop talking before the audience stops listening. And I think that is applicable to online events. You shouldn't keep going beyond the interest level of the audience. What that means is there is no precise length for an event. Because if you've got an event which is absolutely fascinating and people are really interested in it and want more and more information, that could go on for a number of hours. It could go on all day. On the other hand, I would say that in most cases, you've got to keep them a little bit shorter than you would an all-day in-person event. My recommendation is that you don't do much more than half a day, 4 hours or so, with breaks in between. And what a lot of people are looking at now is breaking up one-day events or 2-day events over 5 days. 7 days, having a 90-minute session or a 2-hour session at a regular slot each day, which can be a lot more convenient for the people who are attending the event as well. So I think we've got to be a bit flexible about design. I don't think there's a perfect length or an optimum length, but I think you've got to be aware of the type of event and how that works for the audience interest. Excellent.
And that transitions very well into the next question, because people ask, when we have a couple of speakers, and of course they sometimes topics are very dry. Should speeches be shorter when they're online? And people said sometimes we had 90-minute speakers, we had 30-minute speakers. When it's online, does it need to be shorter, longer? What is your take on that?
Well, as I come back to the fact it needs to be interesting. I can listen to somebody for an hour if I'm fascinated by what they're talking about. On the other hand, if I'm not very interested, 10 minutes is way too much. But as a general rule, I would say that you do need to develop shorter sessions and put some breaks in for reflection and conversation and maybe for some chat. So in terms of, let's say we take a typical 45-minute keynote, which many speakers are used to, I would break that down into 3 15-minute sections or 3 13-minute sections with a little break between each, just to check what the audience has said and leave yourself a little bit of time for responding to any audience queries. I think it's a different dynamic, and therefore you need to treat it in a different way. And certainly, coming back to the analogy of TV or radio, sections would be broken up. You wouldn't have a monologue for 45 minutes on the radio or on television, so you shouldn't do it online. Break it up, give the audience a chance to interact, keep them interested.
Yeah, excellent. One question which is, I think, particularly tricky, but sorry, I have to hand it over to you. Someone asked, they had a couple of speakers which, in their opinion, were a safe bet. They always, it didn't work at all. So how do people find out if someone who's great on stage during an on-site event is also a very good speaker during an online event? How can you find that out before it goes wrong?
That's a very good question. I've heard that come up before as well, that you cannot make the assumption that if somebody is a great on-stage speaker, they're going to be a great speaker online.
Yeah.
So obviously you talk to them, you take referrals. I would ask people, if you hadn't seen them before, I'd ask them to submit a video. Mm-hmm. Put a video together, probably a shorter version of their presentation, send it to the organizer, take a look at that. If you're not happy with it, discuss it with them. Say, I'm not quite sure this works, or it doesn't come across in the same sort of way. I would never take anybody unseen. Mm-hmm. So I would advise people never to go on recommendation from stage to screen. I think you've got to have some kind of vetting process, some kind of verification that they're as good as you think they are. So I would always, if you haven't seen them present on screen, ask them to submit a video. And if they've spoken somewhere else online, then obviously talk to the event organizer there. So referral is very important, but taking an example always works.
Yeah. Does the same apply vice versa? So can someone be great online but not great on stage?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're very, very different environments, and you find that people who are great on stage are not necessarily great on television, and vice versa. I've seen TV presenters absolutely fail when they try and do an on-stage speech. It's a different discipline. There are different skills involved. A lot of similarity, obviously, because we're presenting and we're experts and we're delivering expertise. But it's a different skill set. So no, they don't completely overlap. They're like a Venn diagram, and what you want are the people in the overlap. You don't want the people in the circles outside.
Excellent. Second last question we have for today. Okay. A couple of people said we normally have a Q&A at the end, and it looks like when you have an on-site event, people somehow feel when it is the time not to raise their hand anymore and don't put any questions to the front. Online, that doesn't seem to work. So a couple of people said, first we said there is no Q&A because we have 300 participants, so they receive complaints. Why don't we have a Q&A? Then they did a Q&A, did 10 questions, still had 40 questions on the list, and had to end it there, receive complaint because people didn't get their question answered. So it feels a bit like no matter how I do it, it's always wrong. How can I handle that?
Well, I think the easiest way to handle that is to have some kind of facilitator or moderator, somebody who will look at the chat, for example, look at the questions that are coming in, and we'll amalgamate questions. We'll take the temperature of what's being said and draw together maybe 3 or 4 questions that summarize maybe 40 questions that have come in. It's very, very, you can't do that yourself as a presenter because you're singling people out and people feel, oh, my question wasn't asked. If you've got a moderator in between, what they can do is to say, well, we've had about 6 questions on a particular topic. If I can summarize what people are saying, it's this. That allows you to address the concerns of the audience, and it means that people aren't left thinking, well, my question wasn't addressed. So I think the best thing to do is get a moderator in between.
Excellent. And then, of course, the last questions. How can I close an online event in a way that I have the same atmosphere like an on-site event? You want to make people leave in a positive attitude, that they like the day, that they are maybe motivated, inspired, well-informed. How do I find a proper closing? Because from what I read in the emails, they said that the usual kind of motivational chumbawamba and they all jump up and clap their hand, that doesn't work when it's done online.
No.
So how do I close an online event?
Very good question. I think one of the best ways is to get the audience to say what they felt. You sometimes do this at a live event, but it works really well online. So if you can get people, possibly they might record a little video in the break, or they might just appear live on screen and say, you've got 30 seconds to tell us what you appreciate about this event, what you're going to take away from it. I think getting that audience feedback is the best summary that you could possibly have. If you have half a dozen people saying, this was a great event, we really enjoyed it, was fantastic, then the person who is presenting, or the link presenter, the last speaker, they don't have to close. Yeah, they've got the verification from the audience themselves, and they're going to be far more enthusiastic than everybody on a stage or on a screen would be.
Absolutely. Perfect. Excellent. These were all the questions I have. Of course, I'm going to put your contact data in the show notes of the show. And I'm also going to put the link to the Facebook group in there this time, so people can join and have a conversation with us there. Well, for today, I can only say, Alan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you again, Niels. It's been a pleasure once more.